If you add up the net worth of Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama, if you add up the peak lifetime wealth of all of those presidents and then double it, you double that combined amount, that is the Associated Press's estimate today of the ballpark wealth of Mitt Romney. Interestingly, though, even though Mitt Romney is worth double the peak lifetime wealth of all of those presidents combined, he's only worth about 2 Rick Scotts. Rick Scott is the governor of Florida. He was elected in 2010. Rick Scott is also a zillionaire. He spent $73 million of his own money on pursuing the governorship in Florida. He outspent his Democratic opponent nearly 5-1, and then he narrowly won election. Since then, Governor Scott's approval ratings have sunk through the floor. Notice there have been all these political stories about how weird and interesting it is that Jeb Bush hasn't endorsed anybody and that Marco Rubio hasn't endorsed anybody. Nobody really wonders about Rick Scott not endorsing anybody. It's not exactly a coveted endorsement. But the guy does have a ton of money. And a ton of money can buy a lot in Florida politics, whether it's your personal money or your campaign money. Mitt Romney and his supporters are reportedly outspending Newt Gingrich and his supporters 5-1 in Florida. So despite Mr. Gingrich's post-South Carolina surge, if the polls in Florida hold through tomorrow, Mr. Gingrich looks like he's going to be buried tomorrow under an avalanche of Romney bucks. Part of the reason that Mitt Romney is so personally wealthy, though, has to do with Florida. In 1994, Bain Capital, which he was running at the time, bought a medical company that had roots in Florida. In 1996 and 1997, Bain helped that company take over 2 more medical companies. They also started, as they say, cutting costs. They closed a plant in Puerto Rico, which eliminated between 300 and 400 jobs there. They also shut down operations in Miami. That move eliminated 850 Miami jobs. Cut out $30 million in payroll that those 850 employees used to receive as salary. That was all taken out of the Miami economy when Bain shut that plant down. Then 2 years later, Bain made sure that Bain got paid. They had that same company where they'd fired all the workers take on a huge amount of debt for the purpose of paying Bain Capital. After the layoffs in Puerto Rico and the layoffs in Miami and the debt, Bain walked away with $242 million for themselves and their investors. Then in 2002, just a few years later, the medical company filed for bankruptcy. It was buried under all that debt, and it was bankrupt for 5 years before it finally came out and was bought by another company. This is one of those deals that Mitt Romney worked on while he was running the show at Bain. But then the deal continued paying off for him after he left the company. His arrangement with Bain Capital is that he still gets paid now. So part of why Mitt Romney is worth more money than Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama combined times 2 is because 850 people lost their jobs in Miami in 1997. Making money is one thing. Having money is another. This is something that has received sort of here and there attention in the last week since Mr. Romney released his tax returns. And since we learned that he only pays a special mini tax rate that's reserved for people who don't work, but who just live off long-term investments on their giant piles of money. But making money and having money are a different thing. And if you would like to choose between which one of those ways is a nicer way to make a living, just having money and living off the interest it makes in its big piles is a much easier way to do it and a much more lucrative way to do it. The mini tax rate that Mitt Romney pays, he pays less than 15%, 13.9% in the 1 year that he's given full tax returns. That mini tax rate has not been around forever. It's a relatively modern tax loophole that says if your income is earned on investments that you have had for more than a year, so if your income is earned on giant piles of money instead of on wages, then you only have to pay 15%. Mr. Romney left Bain in 1998, but he still, every year, gets paid a huge amount of money from Bain. Still, now, on the deals he did while he was there. And he pays taxes at that tiny little mini tax rate on that money that he still gets from Bain. Why does that tiny little mini tax rate exist? It exists because a company called Bain lobbied for it. On this, I must defer to the master, Jon Stewart.
In 2007, there was a bipartisan bill to make private equity investors like Romney pay the ordinary income tax rate of 35% on their carried interest earnings, instead of the 15% they've been paying since 1987. Well, funny story.
Do you suspect that the tax treatment for carried interest will be changed?
Listen, if I could tell you about the number of lobbyists that have been hired in the last 2 months to work this issue, you would know that it'd be very risky for me to predict what would happen on this.
Oh, may I make a prediction? Because I'm in the future. Yeah, they killed it. Now, by the way, who were those lobbyists who had so much influence over our government that Charlie Grassley, the Republican Senate Finance Committee's ranking guy, he co-sponsored the bill to adjust the tax rate? Who are the lobbyists that are so powerful? This guy his bricks like he's talking about Voldemort when he brings them up. Well, it was the Private Equity Council, a lobbying group formed, surprise, surprise, that very year by the country's biggest private equity firms, including Mitt Romney's Bain Capital. Now, to be fair, Bain is not Romney. Romney is not necessarily Bain. This whole issue could be an issue they part ways on. And roll tape from 2007.
Have you come out on the proposals coming out of the Democratic Congress to raise taxes on hedge funds, private equity funds, venture capital funds, and so forth?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea to raise taxes.
Yeah, because they're your taxes! Not to say Mitt Romney doesn't believe... Not to say Mitt Romney doesn't believe the tax system need not be reformed. There are certain taxes he feels should be raised.
47% of Americans paying no income tax. That's a heck of a big number.
Yes. The tax code is so unfair to you. So to clarify, the millions of dollars that Mitt Romney saves because of the aggressively lobbied 15% tax rate is legal and fair. And he's entitled to that from the government, no strings attached. But where does Romney stand on other such government largesse?
I also like the idea that people who are receiving assistance, welfare assistance, have a responsibility of working. I think he wants us to become an entitlement society, where the people in this country feel they're all entitled to something from government.
Poor people have lobbyists.
The great Jon Stewart of Comedy Central. He did that segment last week, and that was A, sort of a ripoff of Jon Stewart by showing you that, but B, I don't really think anybody has showed it better or more clearly. So that was an homage, essentially, to Mr. Stewart. Well done. Mother Jones also posted a little piece about this issue today. But other than that overlooked piece on The Daily Show last week, which was genius, and Mother Jones doing this today, this otherwise is broadly not sinking in. The reason Mitt Romney pays only a mini tax on the money he made closing factories at Bain is because Bain uses some of its share of that money that it made closing factories to lobby for its executives to keep paying that mini tax rate. So, yeah, poor people do have sucky lobbyists. On the eve of the Florida primary, Mitt Romney is still getting paid for laying people off in Florida. But money from his campaign and from his super PAC has bought a whole lot of TV ads that make it look like he'd be great for Florida.